I'm gonna get the recording started here. And then we're gonna get the event going in about a minute. We got a few more folks still joining us from the waiting room. And I'm going to enable captions as well. You can see that this meeting is being recorded. Okay, we'll get started. Can everybody see my share screen? Okay, fantastic. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining me today. My name is Matthew Linton. I'm the Senior Manager for Programs and Publications at the Council of Graduate Schools, and I manage the day-to-day work for the National Name Exchange with a lot of help from my CGS colleagues, including NU Joe, who is here joining us today, and we'll be giving you a more detailed presentation of the enrollment information from this year's cycle. I wanted to start by thanking all of you for all of your hard work in facilitating enrollment for the National Name Exchange and communicating with me about different things that are going on at your institutions. It's been a huge help as CGS has transitioned to managing this important resource. Okay, so just a couple of notes before we get into the presentation. So this meeting, a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available with the slides from today's presentation to all National Name Exchange coordinators. My hope is to get that out sometime this week, but it may not happen until early next week. Please do be mindful if you ask questions or have comments to mute yourself when you're not speaking, just for the purposes of the captions as well as the clarity of who's communicating. And then please do feel free to share the chat as a resource, share links, feel free to have discussions and share successes and challenges. Please do use that as a resource. So I wanted to get started with just a broad overview again of what the National Name Exchange is. But before I get started there, I want to just thank a few folks at CGS that have helped make this possible. So as I mentioned before, NU Joe, as well as her colleague Alessandra Reggio, have been crucial in the data collection and maintenance for this project. On the programming side, Sarah Breifogel, Julia Kent, as well as, of course, CGS President Suzanne Ortega. Suzanne was hoping to join us today, but she had a hand injury, so she's having to get some medical attention there. But she gives her best regards and wants to highlight again the importance of the National Name Exchange to the Council of Graduate Schools' mission to support diversity, equity, and inclusiveness in graduate education. So the National Name Exchange has been around for quite a long time. It's been around since the mid-1970s. Historically, it has been managed by the University of Washington until very recently. And the mission of the National Name Exchange is to create opportunities for ethnically and racially underrepresented students to gain access to graduate education. Since 2022, the National Name Exchange has been managed by the Council of Graduate Schools. The Council of Graduate Schools is a membership association of nearly 500 institutions of higher education in the United States and Canada. Our core constituency are graduate deans or their equivalent. So they're usually going to be our primary points of contact for all CGS projects, including the National Name Exchange. And the 2022 cycle was the first cycle that we managed. And so it's been a learning experience for us, just like it has been for many of you. And we're actively looking to improve this resource and make it work better for you and for your students. A little bit of information about which institutions can join the National Name Exchange, just because we've received quite a few questions from our members. So to join the National Name Exchange, you must be a Council of Graduate Schools member institution in good standing, which means that you're up to date on your membership dues. Institutions who are looking to join the National Name Exchange in a given cycle, you don't have to participate in every cycle if you're not able to, but if you want to participate in an annual cycle, you must contribute names of undergraduates to the exchange in order to access the list. And we do this because we don't want there to be a kind of free rider problem where some institutions are contributing all the undergraduate names and everybody is just taking them without contributing anything themselves. As such, since institutional participation of undergraduates is required, participating institutions must have an undergraduate population. So there are some CGS members that are graduate only. We don't currently have a way for those institutions to participate in the National Name Exchange, though as you will see later, that is something that we are working on implementing for future NNE cycles. And then finally, right now, the National Name Exchange is open to US-based universities only. And some of this has to do with the National Name Exchange mission, which is to serve domestic underrepresented students and facilitate their movement into graduate education. This gets very complicated if you start adding in Canadian and Mexican institutions, for example, which may have very different criteria and definitions of what constitutes historically underrepresented population. So it's another area that we're thinking about, ways that we can engage with our international members and our international colleagues. So as we get into the discussion portion, I'd be curious to hear ways that we may be able to engage those constituencies. But currently it is only open to domestic or US-based universities. A little bit more information about the National Name Exchange for new participants. So the annual enrollment cycle for undergraduates runs from March through June in a given calendar year. And the hope there is that you'll catch students while they are on campus. This past year, we ran a summer enrollment, which presents quite a few challenges, as you'll be hearing about in a few minutes. But we generally run from March through June. Also, students must be, as I mentioned before, domestic students. So we've received quite a few questions about whether or not international students can participate in the National Name Exchange. And the answer is currently no. This is a resource that is intended for domestic students. This does include green card holders and other forms of temporary residence, but people who are strictly international students do not qualify for this particular resource. Institutions gain access for recruitment purposes. So there's an institutional portal once they begin enrolling students in the National Name Exchange student portal. So the way the system works is that once I receive notification that an institution has undergraduate students that have enrolled in the exchange for a given cycle, I will then trigger the email for you to receive the access email. That includes the password for the given year, as well as instructions for logging in to the institutional portal for the purposes of recruitment. And then finally, one aspect of the National Name Exchange that differentiates it from some of these other lists, as well as the way that the exchange used to work, is that students self-enroll in NNE. So you will nominate students from your institution, and that nomination process will include an email with a link to our student portal for enrollment. And students will then come in and enter their own information into the student portal instead of you updating or putting the student information into a portal. We do this for a couple of reasons. The first has to do with staffing at many of our member institutions. We're trying to make the staff load as little as possible, because we know that there are institutions that don't have as many staff as they would like, and we don't want to put a huge staff burden on those institutions. So we find that having students do more of the work of implementing and putting the data in lessens that staff burden. The second reason is transparency for students. So students, by having to enter in their own data and go through the process of enrollment, shows them exactly what they're signing up for. And we've heard in the past from some other similar resources that there are high rates of unsubscribe for many students. And one of our theories, or one of my theories, is that This is because a lot of cases students aren't quite sure what they're signing up for when they get put on these lists, and then they receive a lot of emails and they're confused about why they're receiving the emails. And so the hope is that by having them go through the enrollment process themselves, they'll understand what they're signing up for and won't be surprised when they start receiving recruitment emails from institutions. Okay. One more slide before we get to the enrollment. So I know that there's a lot of new institutions as well as a lot of new folks in their roles at universities. And so we're going to have a more involved National Name Exchange New Institution and Coordinator Orientation. So that event is going to be happening on January 25th, 2020 from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. And you'll receive a registration link in the email that's coming with this recording, either later this week or early next week. And that's going to be open to all new institutions that did not participate in the 2022 cycle, as well as new coordinators who are coming from institutions that have already participated. And at this orientation, we're going to walk through the very high levels of kind of what the National Name Exchange is, as well as how to use the student and institutional portals and the calendar of what enrollment and a nomination should look like for an institution. It will also be an opportunity and forum to ask questions, and hopefully we'll get resolution on some of the questions that folks have. But keep an eye out for this event. It will be coming in early January or late January, early 2023. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Enyu Zhou, to talk through the 2022 NNE enrollment summary. Enyu?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you all today to share some of the summary from the 2022 NNE enrollment. But more importantly, I'm looking forward to get your insights and perspectives on the NNE program. Before I started, I would also like to echo Matt and thank my colleague Alexandro's help to analyze the NNE data. Next slide, please. Next slide, Matt. And in 2022, there were more than 80 institutions participated in NNE. So here is a list of participating institutions. And we would like to thank all institutions participated in this program this and every year. Next slide. So overall, there were more than 6,000 students enrolled in NNE in 2022. The students were asked what their graduation year is in the NNE form. And here we found that there were more than 11% of the NNE enrollment was from the class of 2022. About 40% are from class of 2023, 30% from class of 2024, and about 18% from class of 2025. So in terms of the NNE enrollment trends, we do saw that there was over 30% decrease compared to the enrollment in 2021. And the figures on the right shows the NNE enrollment trends from 2016 to 2022. And we do see that there are a large drop this year in 2022. And we also do heard that there are some challenges in terms of the NNE transitions this year and the time frame as well. So I think we look forward to hear all your insights on how we can better improve the program and attract students to enroll next year. So in addition, in terms of in the form, students were also asked if they have research experience before graduation, and about 45.8% of the enrollees indicated that they has a research experience, which increased about 2% from last year. Next slide. So now we'll transition to talk about some highlights in the NNE enrollment by race and ethnicity. So we have about 50 categories of race and ethnicity groups that students can select in the NNE enrollment form. And these groups were summarized into 9 broad race and ethnicity groups, including African American, American Indian, Asian American, Chicano, Filipino, Latino American, others group, Pacific Islanders, and Puerto Rican. And for 2022, about 19% of the NNE enrollees were Asian American, 26% were African American, 27% were Latinx American, 5% were Chicano, 2% were Puerto Rican, and 2% Filipino, 5% American Indian, and 1% Pacific Islanders. Next slide. So we also look at NNE enrollment changes between 2021 and 2022 by race and ethnicity. So this table shows the NNE enrollment number in 2021 and 2022 by race and ethnicity. So we saw that there were increases in the enrollment among all the ethnic groups over the past year, except American Indian, which increased over 140%. Next slide. And we also look at NNE enrollment trends over the past 7 years by race and ethnicity. So here is a figure shows the proportion share of NNE enrollment by race and ethnicity groups. And we see that the share of African American students in the red bar in 2022, and their share among NNE enrollees have grown in 2022 to 26%. Also, American Indian students, their shares grow to 5%, which is encouraging. But we also noticed that the proportional shares of Latinx students among the NNE enrollment lost their share slightly in 2022. Next slide. So here, this figure shows the NNE enrollments by race and ethnicity and gender in 2022. So overall, we do see that there were more females students enrolled in NNE compared to male students. And similarly, there were also a larger share of female students than male students across all the race and ethnic groups. Next slide, please. So in terms of broad fields of study, in 2022, we do saw that arts and humanities had the largest share in the NNE enrollment, which is about 19%. And mathematics and biological science reported the second largest share in the NNE enrollment at about 16%. And followed by arts and science 11%, and education about 10% of share. Next slide, please. So finally, we look at NNE enrollment trends by selected profile of studies. And here, we know that there were overall decrease by 31% of the NNE enrollment. And however, we do saw that there are several fields that increased their NNE enrollment over the past year. In particular, we saw that agriculture has the largest one-year increase in the number of NNE enrollment of all fields of study, which increased by over 1,400%, and followed by mathematics, which reported by over 500% decrease in the NNE enrollment. And we also see that arts and humanities and education increased the NNE enrollment by 120% and 138% respectively. Also, these are encouraging. And I'll end it here and open up for questions.
Thank you, Enyu. I can open up for questions now if there's anybody who has one. Yep, Karen.
Do you allow students to designate a gender different than what they were assigned at birth?
Matt, could you go back to the slides? So yeah, we do see that there is some of different number of enrollment compare female to male students. Like here in the blue bar shows the female enrollment, and in the red bar shows the male enrollment. So we see that we have over 60% of female students enrolled in NNE compared to male students.
Okay, yeah, I thought I had missed it on one of the previous slides, but this helps. Thank you.
Sharnita.
All right. Hello, everyone. I have a couple. So I'll start with this slide too. So for gender, they were able to select non-binary. So where is that accounted for? In what grouping? I think it's the use of other that is kind of concerning, with the grouping piece. But I know they could pick non-binary. So where would those individuals fall within your category? Would that be other or chose not to respond?
Yes, that's a good question. So here in this figure, so in the green bar, it shows the others group option. So in the survey, we do provide 4 choices for students to select. So which is the female, male, other, and choose not to respond. And for students who choose the other option, they will have also have an option to fill out an open-ended question to on their identities. So we do saw a small number of students here, of enrollees who are have selected other and choose not to respond.
Okay.
Here.
Okay, and for the race, students put multiple, right? They may pick Asian, but then click other as well. So are you double counting those individuals who also indicated other, or like how are you breaking down the race piece? A lot of them didn't just pick one, right? They'll put
Yes,
multi-ethnic, I believe is a term used, Colombian, how are you accounting for your other category? Is that distinct group, or are they kind of double counted in if they chose African-American and other, right? Do you get my question? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I think they were not double counted, but
So you
I'll
went by
have to
the
go back
first,
to
the first
yeah,
race
to
that they
the,
picked
yeah,
and
to
not
the,
going to the
yeah,
other.
to the survey data to double check.
Okay, I guess I had four, sorry. The third was math. So I think you're meaning computational sciences and not math specifically. Because math is like 50, and I'm from math discipline, so I'm like, it's really small, specifically mathematics. So is that accounting for computer science and, you know what I mean, some other computational fields within mathematics?
Yeah, I would think so, because these are the broad deal of studies that include more than 100 fine fields. So some of them, some of the other fields that related to mathematics may include it, will include it in under mathematics broad field.
Okay, I just think this clarification of how you're categorizing. And then I think my last question is for you, Matt, and your, I wasn't aware, maybe others do, about it being tied to must be domestic. This was the first reference I've heard of must be domestic. In the past, it was just language about being underrepresented. So when I request data from my institution, right, I'm like, which racial category are you picking? And so within that group, even the listing from this year's cohort, some of them aren't domestic, right? So is that a shift in which CGS is moving to where we now need to require, you know, residency questions in addition to our data requests from our institutions for 2023? Or is that just kind of thinking domestic US-based institutions, knowing that our students come from multiple places?
It has always been a purpose of the National Name Exchange to support domestic students. So yes, it should have been clear that it should have been domestic. We've noticed that in the data, that it's clear that there's definitely some.
Would there be a question on that? Because I don't think it's even a question like, do you consider yourself domestic or, you know, permanent resident or something like that? Would
Yeah,
that
we
be in the future?
Yeah, we can definitely consider adding that. I think so. One of our concerns has been that there could potentially be an overwhelming of this system with international students, and that's not really the mission of what NNE is meant to serve. So we want to make sure that maybe there's going to be an opportunity down the line for international students to be either included in the National Name Exchange or a separate type of resource for international students. But currently, we really want to focus on domestic underrepresented.
Okay, thank you.
Miriam.
Yes, I had a question related to that because in terms of the international students, because there may be students that are kind of in a transition from being kind of, you know, permanent residents, green card holders to like to official, like, you know, domestic US citizens. So I wonder, and honestly, there are institutions that have a number, like their percentage of international student enrollees is like really high. And I do think that oftentimes international students are seeking information about grad programs. They may not be seeking information necessarily about funding because they tend to understand the limitations there, but they're very interested, and they're in that transition period where they're applying for citizenship. So I don't know.
Yeah, so we get a lot of requests from international students to participate. I get a lot of requests in which I say that this is not the resource for them. For students that are in that transitional phase, I would recommend contacting us. Let us know kind of what the situation is, if you know, and we can evaluate a little bit on a case-by-case basis. Again, I think our concern is just making sure that this is serving domestic underrepresented students. And we're worried a little bit because I get a lot of requests from international students to participate. I'm a little bit concerned that if we opened it up to all international students, you would have a very high rate or high number of international students. And I want to make sure this will continue to be a resource to serve domestic underrepresented students.
Yep. No, I appreciate that and love that that mission. The other thing I wanted to say is just thank you, because I think you made the uptake process really easy. For Howard, we had a lot of student interest and a lot of students that were excited to get these emails because they knew they were self-selecting, and we gave them information upfront about what they would expect. So that was really great. Kudos to your team for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we got a couple questions actually in the chat, some of which I'll answer in combination and with you. Just questions about the decline in enrollment overall. And I'll answer a little bit with some of my theories for why there's been a decline overall, and then NU, you can give some of your theories too. So I think there's a couple reasons. I think one is just that transition, right? Like we definitely had institutions, some of you are probably on the line, that we kind of lost along the way, where we lost connections with those institutions. And so they missed the enrollment deadline. And so that's part of the reason why we're going to have more institutions, I would suspect, in 2023. The other reasoning has to do with having students enroll themselves. So we've heard about this as a yield problem, is how it's framed sometimes in other list type services, where, yeah, if you compile all the information yourself and we load it in, then you're probably going to get a lot more students on the list than you would if you nominated a student from your institution and they had to go through the process themselves of inputting their own information. And so I definitely think that there are students that choose not to do that. And from my perspective, at least, I kind of respect that choice, because maybe not every student that meets the standards or, meets the enrollment criteria for participating in the National Name Exchange actually wants to participate. And so I want to make sure that we're really honoring students' wishes and interests and in getting information, because it can be a lot of emails, and I don't want it to be a kind of harassment tool. So, and what are your thoughts on the lower numbers of enrollment this particular year?
Yeah, I think the transitions do maybe one of the biggest factors that impacts this year's enrollment. As you all may know, that last year we transitioned from the NNE program, which was hosted by University of Washington last year, and this year CGS took over, and we developed a new portal that collect the NNE enrollment. So I think a lot of them is maybe big factors, and yeah.
Hey, and I got a question from Emily. So not just be auto-enrolling URM students, but students must choose to enroll themselves. Correct. So if you're looking for more details about that process, we'll be covering that in depth in the new institution and coordinator orientation at the end of January. But a broad overview of the way the process works is that you'll work with either your institutional resource office or maybe somebody in your undergraduate DE&I office to identify these students and let them know that they have been nominated to participate in the exchange. And as part of that nomination email, they'll get a link with the login code to access that institutional portal. And then once they access, or that student portal, once they access that student portal, that's where they'll get the form to enter the information and submit it themselves. So the students will be the ones who will be submitting the detailed information, but we will be working with you to identify and nominate those students on your campus that meet the criteria to participate. Alexis.
Yes, thank you. I just have a quick question about the deactivation of the institutional portal at UW. So I'm at UW Seattle. I'm also here on behalf of Dr. Carolyn, who is out on vacation right now. And we have a lot of new graduate program advisors and graduate program coordinators at UW, and they are, I feel like when they start recruiting in January and February, we're going to get a lot of requests and a lot of questions. I have the Excel sheet downloaded myself, but I feel like it's just not as secure if I'm emailing that to them, because I feel like they're going to ask for it in January, February. So I'm just asking, what alternatives do you have for like a more security protected way to give them these lists? Because I know that these requests are coming.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that folks have done it. So first off, this was going to be at the end of the presentation, but I'll bump it up to now, is that we're not going to be deactivating those pages until the first of the year instead of tomorrow. And part of the rationale there is that our company that does that work is not going to be able to do it to the first of the year anyway, so we might as well keep it open for you all until then. One strategy that I've heard some places do is have a secure server that you can put the information on that's password protected, as one strategy, and then give out that information to your coordinators as needed. So that's one tool. I think the other thing that we're going to be working on learning from all of you is more about this recruitment pattern for your programs, because we do have to do an update at some point, and that has to happen, you know, sometime over the course of the year when students are not actively enrolling in the portal. But if it turns out that there's a better time of the year for that update to happen than in that kind of January, February window, then we should talk about ways that we can make sure that that update happens at a time that works for you. And so that's something we can absolutely accommodate in the future as we learn more. And I see that we're getting some more comments here. Okay. Question. I'll answer a couple more questions, and then we actually have a little bit more presentation that might answer some of these questions. So one is, will you get a report out on institutional participation? No, you're not going to get a detailed report from us on institutional participation. You're welcome to take the data that you receive through the portal and run your own institutional report on that information. We do have some institutions that choose to do kind of a self-scouting of the report, where they'll download the full list and just take out their institutional names and be like, okay, how did the names that actually made it on the list match up with our enrollment efforts? So you can do it that way, but you will not be receiving a detailed report from us. The portal link for undergrads, that is not open right now. So that link will be open starting in March, and there'll be a new institutional password to access that you will all receive ahead of that time. And that's just going to be to avoid confusion with past years. And so that link, you'll be getting much more information about that before, but that's going to be open in March when the student enrollment period begins again for 2023. Okay, so yeah, keep continuing the conversation in the chat. I'm just going to continue the presentation so we don't run out of time. So to build on NU's presentation, and thanks so much, NU, for joining us today. NU's not feeling well, so I really appreciate her joining us and muscling and gutting through the presentation, even though she's not feeling 100%. So I just wanted to do kind of a overview of the successes and failures that mostly my failures at CGS during the 2022 cycle, and kind of what we've learned from this first year managing it. So on the good side, the success side, we were pleased with how well the technology worked. So we were implementing this new system of portals, and that had a big technological component to it. And honestly, I was up at night worrying, like, well, what happens day one when the student portal launches and none of the students know how to get on, or something breaks and students can't get on. And we had relatively few student questions on my side, at least that reached me, about accessing the portal and how it worked. And those questions we did get were easy to answer, and we could provide clear, quick answers to those student inquiries. And we also were pleased that most of the NNE coordinators that we spoke to found that the institutional download list option worked well for them. And even if they didn't use the portal a whole lot to search particular student names, that when they did choose to do that, they didn't have trouble doing it. We also found that institutions were not frustrated by the fact that we did have a 24-hour, while the student portal was still open, there was a 24-hour lag period between when student data was updated. We didn't find that was really an issue for institutions or for students. So that was all good news there. we've gotten off to a good start reconnecting folks in this kind of community of practice that we're trying to build, which you'll hear more about later. But when we came in, we didn't really have very many of the names of the institutional coordinators at the various universities that have participated in the past. And so we were really just trying to get more people involved and trying to figure out who the right person to talk to was on campus, right? So we had a lot of the graduate dean names, but a lot of the graduate deans didn't know who their prior NNE contact had been. And at many institutions, it was in the undergraduate space where a graduate dean may not know the staff very well. So a lot of the work has been just trying to reconnect with people on campus and make sure that we're talking to the right person. We were actually up now to over 160 national name exchange coordinators, up from 152 last week. So, if there's any coordinator changes happening on your campus, or you may be stepping down from the role, please do let me know so that I can have that on our radar and make sure that we keep in contact with the correct person on your campus. And coordinators have generally been very proactive in doing that so far. So a big kudos to all of you for being clear communicators and good stewards of this program. And then the other really interesting news and good news was that we had very few student unsubscribe requests. I was envisioning a world where we were going to get hundreds of student unsubscribe requests to the point that I created a template and everything for it. And we've had fewer than 15 out of over 6,000 students. And my theory there has to do with, again, going through that enrollment process. You're not getting put on a list. You are going through and filling out exactly what you are doing. And I think that makes it clearer to students what they're joining, what they're participating in. And honestly, I would rather, and I've had a lot of inquiries from students on the front end of what is this thing that I've been asked to sign up for? In which case I respond and tell them. I've had parents call me and ask me what their children are signing up for. I'm totally fine handling those requests. I would rather have that transparency than have students feel like they got tricked into putting their name on a list that they didn't want to be part of. So I've been really pleased with how that has gone so far. So that's on the good side. Now on the stuff that we're working on, / some of the problems. So as we mentioned, and you mentioned as well, growing participation and connecting with institutions was a challenge for the past year. I received a bunch of emails on kind of October 31st being like, why aren't we being asked to participate in NNE? Like, where's been the NNE information? And in most cases, it's just there's missed connection somewhere between when we took over management of the list from the University of Washington. And so in some cases, we didn't even have the NNE coordinator in our database system as a staff member from that institution. So we had to build all of that stuff in to make sure that we were communicating with the right people. The other part was that we talked to a lot of institutions that had tried to join the National Name Exchange in the past and basically said, well, we don't have the staff to do that. It's too much work. In trying to explain to folks, no, we have a new process in place, one that shouldn't be as time consuming for staff. You really can do this. And so trying to communicate to more institutions, particularly smaller institutions, that they can participate, that they can join, and that we really want this to be a broad community. We don't just want this to be, the top R1 institutions. We want everyone to participate. So the other one is trying to balance the access and recruitment missions of the resource. And this came up a little bit in the discussion of international students earlier, right? Which is the group of folks that make up this community are kind of split in their responsibilities. So we've got about half of the folks are from the diversity, equity, and inclusiveness community. And then about half of the folks are from the recruitment side of the university. And so I can understand that those two groups may have competing priorities in some cases where, there's some push to make this list as big as possible, as big and broad as possible. Let's include everyone. Let's include rural students who may have been historically underrepresented in higher education. Let's include women who have obviously been historically marginalized in higher education. And so we have to kind of balance that access with the original purpose and mission of this resource, which was for ethnically and racially underrepresented and minoritized domestic students. And so balancing that has been a bit of a challenge. And this is mostly resolved recently around questions about the 3.0 GPA requirement, which still is in place for the resource, but is something we're considering getting rid of for the 2023 cycle. And I'll just lay out the debate that's happening right now around it, so it's 100% transparent for everybody here. 3.0 GPA is a barrier to access, is the criticism of it. Folks may have disrupted learning experiences. They may have struggled their first year, and then don't have access to this important resource that may act as an additional barrier to graduate education. We've heard from graduate administrators that they'll oftentimes make exceptions for students who may not meet that 3.0 GPA requirement, and they would like to be able to see a list that has students that may not have made that 3.0 GPA requirement, but may very well be able to do graduate level work. So that's the one side that's saying, let's get rid of the 3.0 GPA requirement. It's a barrier to access. On the other side, we want to make sure that NNE also provides benefits to students. And one of the chief benefits has been that in many cases, or some cases, there's been a waiving of application fee waiver. There's been application fee waiver offered to students that participate in the National Name Exchange. We've heard some programs that offer that the 3.0 GPA requirement is one of the kind of markers that allows them to offer that application fee waiver. And so we want to make sure that institutions feel like they can be comfortable in offering those benefits to students that participate in NNE. So the students who are in get a lot out of their experience being in the National Name Exchange. So that's kind of the balance that we're having right now. And please email me if you've got thoughts about this. I'm always eager to hear what folks have to say. But we're kind of weighing those two considerations as we move into the 2023 cycle. And our diversity and access committee at CGS has been super valuable in helping us think through some of those questions. So the other two issues, one, making the NNE available to institutions without an undergraduate population. We do have some institutions that are graduate only. And we would really like to include them because they have awesome research opportunities a lot of times. And also they're important pathways for students that are going from a master's to a PhD program potentially. But this has just not been the parameter of the National Name Exchange in the past. So we're looking at ways that we can broaden NNE as a resource to include these institutions and include these students who are in masters looking for PhD programs. We're not sure we're going to get there in 2023. But it is something that we are absolutely looking at and considering. And then finally, making this community of practice a useful resource for all of you as NNE coordinators. So what are some resources and events and other types of tools that we can offer that will be professional development for all of you, or that will be helpful in you doing your day-to-day jobs? We want to make this more than just a kind of once a year list that you look to for recruitment possibilities. We really would like this to help our understanding at CGS of the pressing issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, and access on your campus, as well as networking all of you together so that you can talk about best practices at your institutions that may be portable to other places. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions before we move into the breakout group portion. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any right now, but that's totally fine. So that's what the agenda is for the rest of the call, and we're going to get there. It's going to be breakout groups if folks want to participate. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda for the rest of the call. So I want to give an opportunity for folks to meet one another and get to know your colleagues. And we're going to do this through breakout groups. Also will help inform us a little bit about some answers to some questions that we're looking to get more information about. So the two questions that we're looking to have answered are, what ways can we improve the National Name Exchange? And that these improvements may include better data collection, maybe more specific categories. We had some questions come up about that earlier. Technology, how can we improve the delivery mechanism for the National Name Exchange, as well as any other aspects that you think could be improved. And then finally, the second question is, how can we continue to build a community of practice around the National Name Exchange? What resources and events would you find useful? We want to create things that you would attend. You know, you've all experienced this, I'm sure, with your graduate students and undergraduate students. You spend a bunch of time creating a program and then nobody shows up. We want to create programs that you want to show up to and that you think are useful and that are not duplicative of things that you may be receiving elsewhere. So with that, I'm going to break you into breakout groups. And if folks don't want to participate in the breakout groups, you can feel free to drop off now and we'll send the recording along or later this week, early next week. So let me see if I can do this. Create breakout groups. Okay, and please do remember to assign a report out because we're going to do a report out at the end of this. Welcome back, everyone. We're just waiting on a few rooms to finish up, and then we'll get started with the report out. Okay, great. Welcome back. So We're just going to do a brief report out so we can get everybody off to lunch. Room 1, who is your report out? That's Carmen Jones, Felicia Moss, Thelma Harding, Vanessa Solis, and Wilmore Webley.
I am.
Okay, let's hear it.
We just talked about ways we can improve. So one of the things we talked about was including more of the professional areas. So like dental, law, vet, and having more of those graduate and professional areas. I didn't want to take up too much time. I don't know what else we should talk about, but we answered the first question.
Anyone else from that group want to add anything?
I will say self-selection. I don't know, I guess we talked about that too. So students should self-select. We shouldn't be like spamming students. So having them, if we had to enroll them, one of the people in our group said if we had to enroll them, they wouldn't participate. So basically the student should be able to self-select and do that themselves.
And I will add from group 1, we also talked about the 3.0. It's a good discussion about the 3.0 GPA cutoff and that kind of thing too. So there's some mixed opinions, which is just fine. I'm sure, Matt, you have heard some of those too. So that was a good part of the discussion as well.
Great. Okay, let's move on to room number 2. Thank you, room 1. And room 2 is Dana Mordecai, Joseph Butler, Naire McDonald, and Sharnita Lee.
All right, I'll report out real quick. We thought it'd be helpful to have reminders about how to download the data list, since it kind of comes out quickly in a busy time of the semester, or have it archived somewhere where others can easily find it. We mentioned this before too in other meetings, but have that sample communication for those who are newer institutions, and perhaps a flow in what that process timeline looks like, as well as key people involved. Some people mention associate deans, some don't involve associate deans. So just some best practices around the communication. We also talked about the data reporting and consistency with it so that we can make comparison across years. The category groupings may be different. So just making sure that information is shared so that we can best analyze the data presented for that year. And of course, we talked about the decline. And this year, while we had less institutions in past years, now we have more. Why are there less students? Just figuring out what strategies can be used in the future for that. Then we talked about how to best think about community of practice, first from the student lens, and then for us from institutions. From the student side, we think there's better use we can have for the website meanwhile until the enrollment period opens. So how can we utilize that space to be engaging for students where they still can gain access to valuable resources meanwhile until the cycle opens again. And we know CGS website has a lot of great content. So can we redirect students back out so that they can start browsing through that and kind of self-educating on those topics? And then the other community practice piece, which is saying it's helpful for us to gather together, share lessons learned, best practices. And if there's interest in combining it with CGS annual meeting. I think at least I've heard correctly, I think they're thinking about Boucher being something for CGS coming up next December, if I heard Buzz correctly. So thinking about something also for National Name Exchange, I think it's complementary to some other efforts in institutions. So we talked about.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else from group 2 that has anything else to add? Awesome. Those are some really great ideas, Sharnita. There's some that we've talked about, and the annual meeting piece I think is really an important one that we'll definitely consider. Maybe doing something virtual too, just because I know a lot of people, it's hard for them to make it out to the meeting in December. Great. Room 3, that is Alexis Bull, David Glasgow, Mariela Menendez, Miriam Okina, Sophia Al-Hassan, and Yin Zheng.
I can start for our group. We mainly talked about just kind of our individual experiences at each of our institutions, like how we were able to get the names. Some people in our group had to go through like formal processes on like going through the registrar and everything like that to get the audience load to send out. And we had to send ours through our like Department of Communications in the graduate school as well. We also touched on the institutional portal, how it was a little bit difficult to use. I created our I went through and created like a step-by-step guide on how to do it, and sent that out to all of our graduate program advisors and graduate program coordinators. I believe David did as well. But I think having like those instructions, especially for some new NNE coordinators here, would be helpful for us to know and for us to share out to departments that we're reaching out to so that they can use it. But yeah, if I missed anything, please let me know.
I think that was really good, Alexis. And I think that one of the things we also talked about was ways to incentivize participation, because we did think the self-selection into it allowed for programs to have access to applicants who are, you know, well qualified because of their interest. But wondering if, you know, we can share best practices about ways to incentivize outside of maybe the application fee. Things like, for instance, at Howard, we did a grad summer prep, grad school prep workshop series. So we attached it like, hey, here's an opportunity to get involved with the name exchange, but also here's ways to understand what grad school is about, and so that we can pique your interest and kind of nudge you to the NNE exchange. So best practice sharing might be helpful too.
That sounds great. Yeah, that's an awesome program you've got. Anyone else from room 3? Okay, room 4, there's only a couple of you who stayed, so it's either Erin McPeck or Ellie Ivy are going to be the report out.
So we just talked about the ways we're communicating with students, the recruitment process. We were all pretty new to the NNE this past cycle. And we also talked a little bit about what things to include in the communications to students once they've enrolled, and I guess what would go out in that. And we talked about potentially, like, it'd be nice to have a benefit for them aside from a potential fee waiver, whether that's like a webinar series or something like that, you know, that we could let them know about.
Great. Anything else from room 4? Okay, we've talked about doing webinar series as well for students. We're a little bit concerned about capacity, because if we did like a how to go to grad school webinar and we got like 15,000 people attend, I don't know how useful that would end up being for anyone, but maybe something that's asynchronous with like a Q&A or something, but it's definitely something we've been thinking about too. Okay, and finally, room 5, Karen Wickersheim, Cheryl Doss, Deborah Falk, and Madison Armstrong.
Hello. So we talked about a number of things, but primarily talked about like how things work for us this past year. Many of us were new to this opportunity. So we talked a little bit about some of the things we tried and what we're looking forward to trying. As far as questions or desires, we somewhat talked about like more frequent meetings and meetings in alignment with the phases, right? So there's a phase 1 where how do I get folks to sign up, right? And then there's the phase 2 where like, what do I do with these names, right? And so we talked a little bit about how can we like come together in a kind of systematic way. And then another colleague mentioned maybe having like thematic discussions. So if we do come together, can we talk about a specific element of this process, right? So that we have more time. The breakouts are a little bit of a teaser because it's like, oh, like I get to like lament with other people who get it, but it's just so short, right? So we don't really have as much time and space to really talk about specific issues. The point came up again about how to incorporate grad and professional program only institutions. Like, can there be an informal way to go about that? So we exchanged some contact information and have plans to do that. But then is there a more structural way to add maybe a tick box for students to say, I would love to hear from institutions not a part of NNE or something of that nature, as a way for the grad and professional only institutions to participate. So again, we talked about like how to do that informally. So another thing might just be sharing our contact information, which I know we did earlier, like the list of coordinators, but is there a way to formally add a like additional self-selection about other folks who are, interested in students like me, I'd love to hear from them. So those are some of the things that we talked about among others, but others who were there can chime in as well.
Anything else from group 5? I think that's a great idea. I think one thing that we're looking at a little bit, and I'd be curious as a final kind of wrap up question would be, would there be interest in this group if CGS did some broader kind of DE&I webinars and other sorts of content that had an NNE component, but wasn't only devoted to NNE? So kind of combining broader philosophical or expert-led discussions from a professional development perspective, but also then tying that into the National Name Exchange and allowing it to inform it. Would there be interest in any of that among this group? Okay, looks like there's some interest. So as you may or may not know, we have this other program called Go Jedi, which is a diversity and equity and inclusiveness initiative was started in 2022, but we're kind of doing another launch of it in 2023. And that's going to be a more comprehensive DEI program that will include some of these professional development opportunities. So I'm just looking to think how much we can tie this community in to that group to make sure that you're also receiving those opportunities. So I'm going to put a mark down that we're going to add this group to that list for communications so that you'll receive that information as it goes out. Okay, so that's all that I have. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? Any points that weren't mentioned that you'd like to bring up before we close today? Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. You've been an incredible audience. I just wanted to highlight again all the great work that you all do to make any of this possible, and all the work you do to support your students every day. You can see here that you've got my institutional contact info. If you email this email address, it will come to me, so I'll get it. But you're all incredible, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or concerns. You'll be hearing from me soon with a link to the recording, as well as information about that late January orientation opportunity. Thanks again. Happy holidays. Happy New Year, everyone. And we'll see you in 2023. Bye.